Tov, today's Daf Yomi is Kiddushin Daf Test Kiddushin 9. We're going to start halfway down the page on Test Summit Aleph, halfway down the page on 9a. The Gemara is discussing how do we effectuate a betrothal through a contract. So the Gemara on Test Summit Aleph on 9a asks the following question: Tana Rabbanan B'shtar Ketzad. When it comes to a betrothal, how does it take place through a contract? How does a man betroth a woman through a contract? We've discussed that there are three ways of betrothing a woman: kesef shtar bia, money, contract, or bia. So the Gemara wants to know, how does it take place through a contract? So the Gemara says, kasav lo aniyar o acheres. Let's say he writes it on a piece of paper or even on a pottery shard. Even though it's not worth a penny, if he writes, Bitcha mekudeshesli, Bitcha muresesli, your daughter is betrothed, your daughter is married to me, Bitcha into, your daughter is my wife, Harezu mekudeshes. Under all these circumstances, we're going to say it's a valid betrothal. So that's what he's supposed to do. The man writes it for the woman on the contract. The Gemara says that we have a problem with this. Maske for Rabbi Zera says we have a problem. Rabbi Zera Bar Mamal says we have a problem with this. Halodami, high star, what star zabine? If this is the way you say it has to operate, it's not the same as a regular contract of sale. Let's say you're selling a piece of property. Hasam mocher kosevo sadai mechurocha. There, the person who's selling the field writes, my field I am selling to you. He writes, Mokar Kosavo Sadai Mahurocha. The person who's writing the field says, I'm selling you my field. Hacha, here, who's the one who is, so to speak, acquiring a wife? That's the husband. And so therefore, Baal Kosev Bitcha Mekudeshesli. Here the husband is the one who is acquiring the bride, and he's writing, your daughter is betrothed to me. It should really be, the contract should really be coming from either the girl or her father. So if it's the same as a sale in general. So Rava's response is, no, in each case we have a verse. We have a verse by a sale in general, and we have a verse by betrothal. He sold his field. The man becomes poor and he sells his field. So therefore, when it comes to a field, the Torah says it depends upon the seller. But here in our context, it says ki yikach. When the man takes a woman, ki yikach ish isha, which means the baal tal rachmana. Here by a bride, the husband says the man is the one marrying her, and so therefore he writes the contract and gives it to the woman. So the Gemara says, well, Hasam Namis Ksiv Sados Bakesef Yiknu. There also, when it comes to a field with the story of Jeremiah in chapter 32 of Jeremiah, he says, a field with money he will acquire. So there we see that the purchaser who is writing the contract. Gemara says, no, Kari Bey Yaknu. No, he says, no, there we're going to read it as not as Yiknu, but as Yaknu, meaning the seller is the one writing the contract. He's saying it's coming from the seller. So the time of Karispe Yaknu. So why are you saying that you read it as Yaknu, meaning to say that the seller is the one who is giving over a contract? Because we have the earlier verse in saying he sold his property. Well, but why can't we read it as ki yakich, meaning to say when a woman gives herself over to the man for him to be her husband? Where it says, isn't there a verse that says espiti natati la'isha, my daughter I gave to this man, which means to say that sometimes there is a verse that says it comes from the father or the bride's family. So Rava says, okay, why do we write the contract in this way? That means the man writes the contract, Hareya, Hare Zu Mekudeshes, Hare Zu into, Bitcho into. Why do we write it this way? Says Rava Hilchasaninu. It's a law from Moshe at Sinai, an oral law of Asmachilu Rabbanan Akrai. The rabbis relied upon the verse. Mibayzem, our alternative answer is Hasam Namik Siv. Also by Jeremiah, there's another verse that says Va'akach es Sefer HaMikneh, which says, I take the scroll of acquisition. And really, what is this referring to? That Jeremiah says by the sale, by the contract that was sold, it says, and I took the scroll of acquisition. So we see from here, from that verse, Rashi says that the seller gave it to the purchaser because it says, Va'ekach. Jeremiah says, I took it. Jeremiah was the one who acquired the field from Chan Ma'el. So we see from here that the seller writes, my field is sold to you, and he gives it to the purchaser. And so the Talmud has compared, and so therefore we see that there's another verse which makes clear that when it comes to acquisition of a field, the seller is the one writing in the contract he's selling it, and the purchaser is purchasing it. And it's all compared to Jeremiah. And Jeremiah is, this paradigm of Jeremiah is what's the controlling comparison for a divorce. You know that Jeremiah bought the field at a low point, and now it's flourishing in the land of Israel today. And that was Jeremiah's prophecy. That's the rabbi's vision of hope for the vision of hope for this, for marriage as well. Amar Rava, Amar Rav Nachman, Kosovo, Anira, Achara, Salpisha, Imboshava, Pruta, Bithcha, Mekudeshesli. So Rava says the name of Rav Nachman. Let's say he writes on a paper, on a pottery, even though it's not worth a penny. He says, your daughter is betrothed to me. Bitcha Muresesli, Bitcha Lilintu, your daughter is my wife. Bein Idea Avia, Bein Idea Atzma, whether through her father or through herself, Mikudeshes, she's betrothed. So Gemara explains, Midaito, if it's with his consent, then she's betrothed. V'hushalo Bagra. That's assuming she's a minor. Because of all near herself, but if he says, you're betrothed to me, either through her father or through herself, Midata, it's with her consent, but that's only when she's an adult. So that's what the Gemara is saying. So now the Gemara asks the question, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, by Rish Lakish asks the following question, Shtari Rusin Shekasvu Shalol Shma Mahu. Let's say you have this contract of betrothal, behold, you are betrothed to me, which is not a ksuba. We already did check the ksuba. Ksuba is a bond. This is just a formal way of betrothing. So he writes it without intent. Rashi says that means he writes it for a different woman. He writes it for a different woman. He doesn't write it for this woman. Now he changed his mind and he wants to marry this woman. It's the same name. So, or it doesn't necessarily say that needs to have the name in it. We haven't said that you need the name in it, but I assume that there would be a name. So he says, you write the betrothal without the right intent. Is it still a valid betrothal document? Do we say Ma'u Havayos Yitzios Makshin? Do we compare marriage to divorce? And Ma Yitzia, just like on top of Tesla Base, just like when it comes to divorce. But Lashma, we require that the husband writes the get specifically for this woman. Ha'af Havaya, so too this betrothal contract, but Lashma, we require the betrothal contract to be written specifically for this woman. Or maybe we compare betrothals to one another. Why, just like when the betrothal is done with money, we don't require that the coins are made specifically for this woman. You can use any coin. So to the betrothal through a contract, maybe we don't require it to be written specifically for this woman. Gemara says, Basar Debaye Hader Pashta. After Rish Lakish asked the question, he answered it. He says, we compare the betrothal to divorce. Meaning to say, we require intent with the writing of the betrothal document. The verse says, so we compare the two. Now the Gemara asks the next question. let's say you write the betrothal document for this specific woman, but without her knowledge of it. You wrote it without her knowledge. Rav of Ravina Amri Mikudeshes, Rav Papa of Rav Sharvia Amri Ein Mikudeshes. So Rav and Ravina say she's betrothed even if you write it without her knowledge, and Rav Papa and Rav Sharvia say she's not betrothed. So Amar Rav Papa. So Rav Papa says, Ema Taima Didayu, Ema Taima Didayu. Again, Rav Papa says she's not betrothed if she didn't have knowledge of the writing. So Rav Papa says, I'm going to explain the logic of Rav and Ravina who say she is betrothed even without knowledge. And I'll explain my logic as well, that she's not betrothed. Ema Taima Didayu. I'll explain their logic. They'll say the Yatzav Haisa says by divorce. And it's this week's parsha. The Yatzav Haisa Ishacher. That's this week's parsha. So what do we do from there? We say from there as follows. So we say from there, Makish Avayli Yitzia, Mayitz Shma V'Shalom Daita, Afavaya Nami L'Shma V'Shalom Daita. But Papa says that the logic of Rav and Ravina is just like by divorce, you require the get to be written L'Shma, but we don't require her knowledge of it. It can be given against her will. She has not required to have knowledge of it and when he's writing it. So too, when you betroth her, you require the writing to be done with Shema, but she doesn't need to have knowledge of it. The aim of time of the Rav Papa says, I'll tell you my logic. It says the Yatzav Haisa, Makish Avayel Yitzia. We compare Avaya to Yitzia. We compare marriage to divorce. My Yitzia Bagina Das Makna. Just like by divorce, we need the knowledge of the husband, and the husband is the one who's granting the release to the woman. So he's called the Makna. So too, Av Havaya, so too by marriage, Bagina Das Makna. And we require the Das, the knowledge of the one who's being Makna. And in marriage, the husband is not being Makna. He's not granting anything. It's the woman who's granting anything. She's granting herself in marriage to the man. And so therefore, we need her knowledge. So the Gemara raises a question. So this is a question on Rav and Ravina because it says explicitly in the Brisa, you can only write the contracts of betrothal if you have the das, if you have the knowledge of both of them. Means to say you require the knowledge of both the husband and the woman. So isn't this a question on Rav and Ravina who say you don't need das? My love, shtare rusin b'nisuin mamish. So isn't this good morning, welcome back. We got a big chevra here this morning in person. So isn't this aren't we referring to the shtari erusin and the suin mamish? We're in the middle of Tessama base. Aren't we referring to the contracts of betrothal? And we're saying we require das for them. The Gemara says, no, that's not what it's referring to. It's referring to shtari psikta. This is the shtari psikta. That's what you need knowledge. And what's the shtari psikta? Excuse me. Shtari psikta, she says, these are the conditions that the two parties are placing amongst themselves. The money, that not the actual marriage, but the money around the wedding, around the agreement, what each side is going to pay for. Like Rav Gidu Amarav taught, Rav Gidu Amarav, Kama Tanosim Rabincha Kach V'Kach, Rabitcha Kach V'Kach, Amdu V'Kitshu Kanu Henein Varma Nitnim B'Amira. That they each say, okay, how much are you going to give for your daughter? How much are you going to give for your son? They say this, this, and this. Then they stand up and they agree to it. Those are things that are agreed to with words. Oh, okay. So Rashi explains, yeah, so that's an agreement that's binding. But if then one of the parties wants to write it down, he needs to have the consent of both parties to write it. Why? Because if you write it down, it makes it a more secure agreement. You can get it from property that you have, that he has at the time. You can go in and you have basically a lien on the property. It's more secure. So therefore, if you want to take the shtari psikta, if you want to write down the agreements, well, that you need to have the consent of both parties. So now the Gemara is up in the middle of Tessama Beis. The Gemara wants to know, we've seen how you can betroth through kesef, through money, through shtar, through a contract. The Gemara wants to know, how do you betroth through bia? Bia is cohabitation, intercourse. The Gemara asks the question, bia minolan. How do you betroth through bia? So Amar Rabbi Avo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, or how do we know you can betroth through bia? Now the Gemara has already, and we'll see this in a moment, the Gemara has already discussed this, but just en passant. So now the Gemara goes into it in depth. So Rabbi Avo says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the Amar Kra Be'ulas Baal. There's two verses that mention that she is a Be'ulas Baal. A woman is called a Be'ulas Baal. There's the verse which Rashi here says it's referring to the verse from our parasha, Kiseitse, that Kimata is Shochev Imisha Be'ulas Baal. But according to the Riyah Zaken, the verse is coming from the story in Genesis with Avimelech kidnapping Sarah. So where the angel of God or God comes to Avimelech and says, "Why did you take her? She's a Be'ulas Baal." So Rabbi Yochanan says this teaches us This teaches us that she becomes married through Be'ila, through Bia. So Rabbi Zera says, Amalei Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Avo, Amalei Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan. So the Chavrusa of Rabbi Yochanan is Reish Lakish, or Rabbi Zera, so with Rabbi Avo, they turn to them and they say, why are you citing this pasuk? Ka'ura zu Shoshana Rebbe, but is it disgusting to you? That which Rebbe taught, there's a price earlier than you. It says, Uve Allah. The pasuk says, Hikach ishisha uva Allah. That's also our parasha. When a man takes a woman and he's ba'Allah. And what did Rebbe say? Rebbe said that price teaches us specifically that a woman is betrothed through Bia. So why do you have to tell me the pasuk of the Hebrew last Baal that ki matzei shochev misha be'ulas Baal when we have a specific verse kikach isha uve Allah. So the Gemara says, well, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Avo would say, no, if that was the pasuk that we were citing, Be'ulas Baal, I might have thought that in order for the betrothal to be binding, you first need to be Mekadesh and then do the Bia. You need to both. You need the Kasef and the Bia. Kamash Malan, so therefore we have the pasuk of Uve Allah that you just need the Bia. So Maske for Rabbi Abba Bar Mamo. So Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Abba Bar Mamo challenges the question. He said, I don't understand the question that Reish Lakish is even asking on Rabbi Yochanan. Are you saying that the Havamina, the initial assumption of the Gemara, is that you might have even thought that you require Kiddushin and Bia in order for it to be binding? How would we ever have the scenario which the Torah discusses, which is a Nara Murasa, which is a girl between 12 and 12 and a half who's betrothed, and she's a virgin, then she gets skila, she's adulterous. If she's not a virgin, she gets strangulation. But if you're saying Ida Iktish Vahadar Baal Bu'ulahi, if she first had the betrothal with money, and then she, in order to formalize the betrothal, she has the bia, and she's already be'ulah, no longer a virgin at that moment. And Ida Iktish V'lo Baal, and if she had the betrothal and she never had the bia, Rav Kumu, she's not betrothed. She needs the bia in order to be betrothed. So how could we ever have a case of Nara Murasa? So that's what Rav Abba Bar Mamo says. I don't even understand this question that you're having on Rabbi Yochanan. So I'm a Rabbanan Kamei Abai. So the Rabbanan said this Havamina, this challenge from Rabbi Abba Bar Mamo and in front of Abai. And Abai says, I'll tell you how. Mishkachasla, I'll tell you how you can have her, how she could be a Murasa and still a virgin if after they did the Kesef and then they formalized it with Bia. This is all, by the way, just a Havamina. If they formalized it with the Bia, but the Bia was Bia Shalo Kedarka, and since it was Bia Shalo Kedarka, she still retains her virginity if it's this irregular Bia. That's how he betrothed her. So Bia Shalo Kedarka, so she's still a virgin, but yet she's betrothed. So Abai says, no, that's not going to work. Abai says to the Rabbanan, where is there's a dispute, which we'll see in a moment, between Rabbi and the Rabbanan, whether Bia Shalo Kedarka makes her no longer categorized as a virgin. But that's only when somebody else actually is with her, Bia Shlo Kedarka. Aval Baal, but if it's her husband, Divrei Akol, then everybody will be of the position that if her husband was with her, Bia Shlo Kedarka, Baal Shlo Kedarka, Asa Ba'ua. He, in fact, takes away her virginity. If the husband is with her, Bia Shlo Kedarka, everybody would say she's no longer classified as a virgin. So the Gemara says, well, what is this dispute? Mahi, what is this dispute? The Tanya, Bo Nashim. So this is the brisa that if 10 men were with her, Vadayin hi besua, and she's still a virgin, Kuam beskila, then they all get skila. She's a Nara Marasa, and 10 men in a row were with her, then they're all going to get skila. They're all going to get stoned. Why? Because clearly it was Biashul Kedarka, and so therefore she's still an Arusa. Whereas Rebbe says, Omer Ani Arishon beskila, that the first one gets skila because he's with her Biashul Kedarka. Vikuam b'chenek, but everybody else gets strangulation, meaning to say, Rebbe says, Bia Shlo Kedarka takes away your virginity. So, and Amar Avnam Bar Yitzchak, how do we have it? So therefore, we see from here that the whole dispute is that everybody agrees in that case that they're only arguing by another person. But if the husband would be the first person to be with her, he would make her not virgin. So that case is referring to where all those other people are not her husband. Rebbe says she takes away her virginity, and the Rabbanan say it doesn't. But if the first one would have been her husband, then even the Rabbanan would agree that it would take away her virginity. So the Gemara says, so we still want to know. We don't understand the Havamina. How can we ever have a case where there's a Nara Murasa who's a virgin? So the Gemara says, yeah, when do we say that you would need the bia to finalize the Kiddushin? Now, it's only if you did it with money, but if you did it with a contract, then it would be formalized even without the bia. Since it works for divorce without anything else, you just have a contract for divorce. So therefore, it works by betrothal by itself. So then the Gemara says, okay, fine. The Rabbi Yochanan, who learns the fact that bia works from Bu'uas Baal, so if that's the case, what does he do with the pasuk Ube'ala? Ube'ala my avid way, because Rabbi says Be'ala teaches us bia works for Kiddushin. So Rabbi Yochanan learns it from something else. My avid way, so he says, he says actually he could really interpret Rebbe as saying this, because what is the actual text of the Brisa? She's betrothed with Bia. Rabbi Yochanan would never argue with Rebbe, so he's saying Rebbe means that that's the conclusion of the Bia. So if that's the conclusion of the Kiddushin, it started with Kesef. So what is Rabbi Yochanan? What is Rebbe saying according to Rabbi Yochanan? He says, yeah, this woman is betrothed with Bia. But an Ama Ivriya, but a Hebrew maid slave, she's not betrothed through Bia. Hebrew maid slave is not betrothed through Bia. She's only betrothed through money. So because you might have said to Rabbi Yochanan, you might have said, well, let's derive it from a Kal V'chomer from the case of a Yavama, a woman who falls in love for marriage. My Yavama, she nicknames because of nicknames for Bia. Yavama, she's not betrothed through money, but she is betrothed through Bia. Zusha nicknames Bekesa. So the Ama Ivriya, who is betrothed through money, Eino Din nicknames with Bia. For sure, she should be betrothed through Bia. And so therefore, it's teaching us that the Ama Ivriya is not betrothed through Bia. So the Gemara says, but why would you think to learn a Kal V'chomer from a Yavama? You can't learn a Kal V'chomer from a Yavama. Mal Yavama shkeins kukavo medes. The Yavama is already partially betrothed. She was betrothed by her first husband. So the Gemara says, you might have thought because it says, hold the cost of imachara sikachlo. Since it states, by the case of the Ama Ivriya, it states, the verse states, the Torah writes the Ama Ivriya, imachara sikachlo, means to say that the master will take another wife. Ikisha kosov lacharis. The Torah is comparing this Ama Ivriya to another wife to say ma acharis mitnaya b'bia. I might have thought just like another one can be acquired through Bia, so too the Ama Ivriya can be acquired through Bia. Mashmalom are saying no, that she can't. The Rebbe hides Barminole. So how does Rebbe know this teaching? Because Rebbe has the pasuk of Ba'alah. So therefore, he doesn't use that to teach us that Amma Ivriya cannot be acquired through Bia. So how does Rebbe know that Amma Ivriya cannot be acquired through Bia? He says, in Kin Lichtov Rachmana Uval. Why does it say Uval? We learned that from Uval. We learned that a woman can be betrothed through Bia, but Amma Ivriya cannot. So the Gemara says, or Rava, the Amar Barahina Azberli, and according to Rava, who said that Barahina explained to me as follows: Kiyikach ish isha uvala, that teaches us Kiddushin Hamisur Rabia have a Kiddushin. Since Rava learns out from the Barahini, who explained to him that we learn from those words that what kind of Kiddushin, in order for betrothal to be valid, it must be a betrothal that you can have bia as a consequence of that betrothal. Because what's that case referring to? That case is referring to the fact that if we're going to learn this in chapter 2 of Kiddushin, and if a man betroths a woman, but he's not sure which one of two sisters he betrothed, then he's not going to be allowed to have bia with either one, because you're not allowed to marry two sisters. And so therefore he can't be with either one, because maybe the other one was the one who he betrothed, and now he'd be marrying two sisters. So the Rava learns it out from that pasuk of Kikach ish isha uvala to teach us it's only valid if it's a Kiddushin that is able to be consummated. By the way, Tosfos explains it differently, but we're going to focus on Rashi. So according to Rava, how does he know this idea of Amma Ivriya cannot be betrothed through Bia? Ma'iko and Meimer. So he goes, Im Kain Yachtov Akra, O Ve'ala, My U Ve'ala, Shema Minakul. We learn all three things. We learn the idea of Kiddushin Misurim Bia. We learn the idea of marriage through Bia, and we learn that Amma Ivriya cannot be betrothed through Bia. Rabbi Hai Be'ulas Baal Mai Avilas. So what does Rabbi do with the pasuk that Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Avo cite to teach us that a woman is betrothed through Bia, which Rabbi doesn't need, because he learns that from Uvalah. So Hami Baile Baal Sa Be'ulas Shel Kedarka Ve'in Achar Sa Be'ulas Shel Kedarka. Rabbi says it teaches us the Chiddush that only the husband can make her a non-virgin through Bia Shel Kedarka, but other people don't take away her virginity. The Gemara says, but wait, we just said Rabbi doesn't say that. Me Islay Rabbi Isfara. Didn't we just say that Rabbi says the husband is not the one who makes her a non-virgin through Bia Shel Kedarka? Didn't we just say Vatanya Boa Asar Nashladani Besua Kulam Beskila? Rabbi Omer Ani Arisha Meskila Bekulam Mechanik. Rabbi says the first one gets skila. I mean, the one who's not her husband gets skila. So even though it was Bia Shel Kedarka and it was not her husband, we're saying that she gets that he takes away her virginity. So we just said Rabbi just says it in that case that the non-husband can also take away her virginity through Bia Shel Kedarka. So the Gemara says on top of Yud Amid Aleph, I'm Rabbi Zera, Moda Rabbi Leinian Kenas to Kulam Meshami. So Rabbi, even though Rabbi says that every man who's with a woman Shel Kedarka makes her a non-virgin, and therefore the ones who are with her afterwards get chenek, and the first one gets skila. Nevertheless, what Rabbi was saying with respect to a kenas, with respect to the penalty which you pay for assaulting a virgin, there Rabbi would say that if she was not a narusa and others assaulted her, the kulam mishami, that all of them would have to pay the full penalty, because with respect to this, she's not going to be considered like bu'ula. With respect to this, Rabbi says that only the husband makes her non-virgin through Bia Shel Kedarka, but the other people don't. So in this case, they would all have to pay the full penalty as though they were with a virgin, and as though they were with the virgin. And the Gemara asks the question, Ma'ishna Mikato. Why is this case different from death, where when it comes to death, the first one gets skilled and the others get chenek, but here when it comes to payment, they all have to pay. Gemara says, Shani also, no, that case is different when it comes to paying the Amar Kra, because the pasuk says, that the man who slept with her alone will die. The word levado, Raj says, is extra. So which teaches us this idea that he himself will get a unique punishment because he's the one who took away her virginity. The Rabbanan who say though they all get under this case, they all get skila. The Rabbanan hayu vadome abdile. What do the Rabbanan do with the words of Ado? Mibalu kedetanya. The Rabbi is learning to teach us like the following Christ. Meisu gam shnehem. And when do they both die? Achi yushavin ke'echad, until they both are equivalent, meaning to say that they're both adults. Not a, this is how Rashi understands it, not an adult with a minor. Again, here Tosfos gives a different explanation. Different Rabbi Yoshai. Rabbi Yonason says, Rabbi Yonason says, how do we know that? We know it from the pasuk of Mesa Isha Sher Shachavi Moladeu. Rabbi Yochanan Hai Svara Minaway. How does Rabbi Yochanan know this idea that how does Rabbi Yochanan know this idea that only the husband can take away her virginity through Bia Shalokadaraka? So the Gemara says, where it is learned out, he says he learns both of these ideas. We learn Kiddushin through Bia, and only the husband can take away her virginity through Bia Shalokadaraka. So now we'll stop the recording here. Shkoyach, and